Did you know that there is a country in Europe that has changed so much over the years that it has even moved from one location to another? Yes, that's what I said, and I am not exaggerating. I'm talking about Poland, the country that has shifted to the west. And I mean literally, not figuratively. Look at this. Poland as a country has one of the most complicated histories of the 20th century. Invaded and subjugated time and again. This country was under German control, then invaded by the Russians, later occupied again by the Nazis, then again by the Soviets, and finally ended up as a satellite country of the Soviet Union until 1989. Now, however, its fortunes look very different. Since joining the European Union in 2004, Poland has been one of Europe's best economic performers. Its GDP has soared by 164% between 2004 and 2021. This growth is 20% higher than that achieved by the Czech Republic during the same period, very similar to that of Latvia, and only slightly behind that of Estonia and Lithuania, two of the most successful countries in Europe in the last decade. As a comparison, during this same period of time, economies such as those of Spain and Italy barely grew by 34% and 16% respectively. And so, although it still has a long way to go to catch up with the more developed Europe, Poland has become, thanks to its relatively cheap and well-qualified labour force, an industrial powerhouse. In addition, its 38 million inhabitants give it considerable demographic weight in the old continent. For example, Poland is the 5th largest country in the European Parliament, with 52 of the 705 members, which guarantees it, in theory, a strong voice within the European Union. And now, as we've already told you here on VisualPolitik, the country is building one of the largest armed forces in the entire continent. So, taking all of this into account, anyone would think that Poland has all the ingredients to become one of the strongest and most influential countries in the European Union. However, slow down a minute, let's not go too fast. Reality is often not so straightforward. And if there is one thing that categorizes Poland today, it is precisely that it is outside the Brussels mainstream. And VisualPolitik viewers, on this occasion, the question is very clear. To what extent could Poland become a full-fledged European power in geopolitical terms? Well, let's take a look.
The naughty boy in the class.
There's no other way to say it. The Polish case is complicated. Yes, it's true that during recent decades, Polish history has been fundamentally a success story. However, not everything is rosy, far from it. Particularly the current PiS government, the Law and Justice Party, which has staged a direct clash with Brussels. Some decisions, such as the attempt to increase the executive's control over the judicial system, or the response given, for example, to LGBT matters, have caused the country to practically be ostracized in Western Europe, including the upper echelons of the Community Club since 2015. So what exactly happened in 2015 to cause one of the European success stories to become a kind of black sheep in the eyes of Brussels? Well, let's just say it was the year PiS came to power. PiS, the Law and Justice Party, is a party belonging to the conservative right, with nationalist, populist, and even somewhat Eurosceptic overtones. So, from the very first minute, their objective was very clear. Under their government, Poland would put the traditional and moral principles of the country before any campaign or narrative coming from Brussels. Campaigns that, according to them, are dominated by an ideology that is too biased to the left. Which means also calling into question ties with Germany, a friendship that the previous government of Donald Tusk, Prime Minister of Poland for 7 years, had taken great care to foster. And keep in mind, we use the words question the friendship with Germany, but the truth is that we could also say to freeze, to break, even to blow up. What's more, we could say it without the slightest hesitation. Look at this.
There is no doubt, looking at the actions of the EU, that it has to be a continent under German hegemony. This is the implementation of the Fourth Reich. Marcin Romanowski, Under-Secretary of State in the Ministry of Justice. We do not fit into the German-Russian plans to rule over Europe. An independent, economically, socially and military strong Poland is an obstacle for them. From a historical perspective, this is nothing new. Jarosław Kaczyński, PiS party leader.
Pretty hard line, don't you think? Well then, another moment that contributed to the cooling of Warsaw's relations with Berlin, Paris and Brussels was Poland's blunt refusal to take in refugees during the 2015 migration crisis. Their justification was that the people were largely not refugees, but migrants. It was a position which earned Poland the image of an unsupportive, racist and xenophobic country. So, as you can imagine, at that time, this country became almost toxic in European power circles. No one wanted to get too close to them. In fact, many political analysts even described it as a pariah country. So, what did all this mean in practice? For instance, the European Union blocked the delivery to Poland of the 36 billion euros of next-generation post-COVID recovery funds to which it is entitled. In fact, this has been the case until recently, and thanks to Poland's role in the Ukrainian war, the tension has eased, although not without a lot of controversy.
May 2022, EU finalising deal with Poland for €36 billion COVID recovery plan. Brussels is closing in on a deal with Poland to free up tens of billions of euros in grants and loans after a year of deadlock, a senior EU official has said. July 2022, Brussels questions Poland's judicial reforms to unlock EU recovery funds. Poland's first payment of EU recovery funds risks being delayed after the European Commission detected one key element missing from the country's proposed judicial reforms.
Now hold on a minute, because this is not the whole story. During the last few years, and while it was time and again threatened and sanctioned by the European Union, Poland has developed a very strong regional role and has led alliances such as the Visegrad Group, or the Three Seas Initiative, which we have already covered here on VisualPolitik. And now, following the Russian invasion of Ukraine, it has become clear that Poland's role is much more important than anyone would have thought. So, listen up.
The new post-Ukraine paradigm.
The history shared by Poland and Ukraine has not always been as good as the friendship that unites them today. Do you want a fact? According to Poles, Ukrainians were the people Poles liked the least, second only to Romanians. The historical relationship between Poles and Ukrainians has had many dark episodes. In 1943 and 1944, for example, it is estimated that several mass murders by Ukrainian nationalist partisans connected with Stepan Bandera killed between 70,000 and 100,000 Poles in Volhynia. The idea was to ethnically cleanse the region of eastern Galicia, now part of Ukraine, so that it would never be Polish again. For their part, the Polish resistance responded by killing between 20,000 and 25,000 Ukrainian villagers. And historically, what has bothered Poland most has been that some of the perpetrators of these massacres have been revered as national heroes in Ukraine. You already know that the 20th century was terribly harsh. The thing is that, as recently as 2018, the Polish parliament passed a law declaring it a criminal offence to deny the crimes of Ukrainian nationalists. Now wait a minute, because in spite of this, things have changed radically over more recent years. In fact, Poland and Ukraine are the living example of the fact that, in many cases, settling historical quarrels is the best possible decision. We're talking about two countries that became close allies long before the Russian invasion of Ukraine, and now, of course, they are even closer. VisualPolitik viewers, Poland has been guiding the Ukrainian authorities for years on what reforms to make and how to improve its economy, institutions, and political system to adapt to an eventual accession to the European Union. Yes, you could say that Poland has become the mentor for Ukraine. Not to mention that Ukrainian immigrants have become the largest foreign community in Poland, a country that, as you remember, is not a receiver, but typically a sender of emigration. But the question I'm sure many of you are wondering is, so why on earth are two countries that for decades have practically hated each other now getting along so well? Well, the truth is that this strong alliance is not only in Ukraine's interest, but it is also at the center of Poland's strategic interests, and this is for several reasons. On the one hand, for Warsaw, with the exception of Kaliningrad, Ukraine is a kind of buffer, a security zone with respect to Russia. For Warsaw, this has now become absolutely clear.
Wherever we live in Europe, we must be aware that Ukrainians are defending not only their independence and sovereignty, but also Europe as a whole. Putin will never stop. He will constantly expand his empire. Mateusz Morawiecki, Prime Minister of Poland.
On the other hand, Ukraine allows Poland to greatly increase its sphere of power and influence throughout Europe, even more so if in the future Ukraine becomes a member of the European Union. Together, these two countries would have more than 80 million inhabitants, which would equal the population of Germany and, therefore, their combined representation in the EU institutions. What's more, if we take into account other countries politically close to Poland, such as the Baltic states or Slovakia, Warsaw would become one of the most influential capitals of the old continent. You know, you have to keep an eye on the horizon. Now, following the Russian invasion of Ukraine, this role and ambition of Poland has become clearer than ever. For example, Poland is not the only country that spends the most on defense in all of Eastern Europe, but also its efforts will multiply in the coming years to become one of the strongest armies in the whole of Europe.
Poland will double military spending as war in Ukraine rages. Poland will more than double military spending in next year to as much as 138 billion zloty, $29 billion. Additionally, the government plans to spend as much as 40 billion zloty, $8.56 billion, to buy arms abroad.
This is something we talked about in detail in a recent video that I'll link for you in the description. But it's not just about military spending. The truth is that during the Ukrainian conflict, Poland has taken the lead and has become one of the major political players, the largest recipient of refugees, and one of the largest senders of aid. For example, to date, more than 5 million Ukrainians have passed through Poland, and more than 2 million remain living there since the beginning of the war. What's more, since the Russians launched their campaign of annihilation and destruction, we have seen Polish leaders constantly traveling to Kyiv and launching a lot of communiques and statements in English, addressed primarily to Western Europe, which has moved much more slowly and timorously. For example, in April 2022, the Polish government itself launched an international campaign to embarrass the Western leaders of countries such as Germany. We're talking about the #StopRussiaNow campaign, which the Polish Prime Minister himself introduced on his own Twitter account. A campaign with which Poland has been traveling on mobile billboards in various European capitals with particularly harsh and critical slogans and images. There is even a Polish government YouTube channel dedicated specifically to denouncing European leaders for their lukewarm stance in helping Ukraine. Warsaw has not hesitated to lead the European response to Russia, to lead the bloc of Central and Eastern European countries supporting Kyiv, and to put pressure on the rest of the community. In this way, this has brought into focus the enormous political capital that Warsaw has been building for years beyond Brussels. It has even not hesitated to throw an icy pitcher of water on the strong relationship that links the Polish PIS government with the Hungarian, and now for many, pro-Russian, leader Viktor Orban.
I confirm the words of Prime Minister Orban that the paths of Poland and Hungary diverged. Mateusz Morawiecki, Prime Minister of Poland on 29th of July 2022.
But beyond Hungary, Warsaw has become the reference capital of Eastern Europe, including the Atlantic axis. A position that has caused it to clash head-on with the old heads of the European club. Take, for example, the words of French President Emmanuel Macron at the beginning of September 2020, words that were aimed like a dagger directly against the Polish government and also against the Baltics.
We must do everything to make a negotiated peace possible. Not letting Europe become divided will be a daily challenge for us all. Nor should we align ourselves with the most warmongering types, which would run the risk of extending the conflict and closing off communications completely. We shouldn't consider either leaving a few European states on our eastern flank to take action alone. Emmanuel Macron, French President.
There is also a widening gulf between the positions of Western Europe and those of Eastern Europe. So, on the one hand, we have the France-Germany axis and all its major peripheral allies such as Spain and Italy, who are eager to end the war and negotiate with Putin, if only to secure energy supplies. And on the other hand, we have the Eastern Bloc led by Warsaw, which advocates arming Ukraine to the teeth, defeating Russia, breaking completely with Moscow, and strengthening ties with Washington and London. And take note that we are talking about a fracture, a crack that is getting bigger and bigger, and that even threatens to split the European Union in two. And Warsaw wants to be ready to lead one of these two blocs. It wants to do so from the political point of view, from the economic point of view, as the great industrial power in the region, and also from a military point of view. And in this game, Ukraine could play a key role. VisualPolitik viewers, perhaps we are not aware of it, but in Europe, a new centre is emerging parallel to the one set by Brussels, Paris, and Berlin. A new European bloc that is much more pro-American, pro-British, pro-NATO, and with political positions far removed from the mainstream that reigns in the current European Union. And that is a huge opportunity for Poland to become one of the great political powers of the old continent. So you see, this war has brought a lot more to the table than Vladimir Putin's lack of humanity and sanity. The war in Ukraine has even put the leadership of Paris and Berlin in check, and may end up changing the European Union forever. What seems clear is that the war in Ukraine will be followed by a new war, this time of a diplomatic nature, in the heart of Europe. The question is, will Poland end up becoming a kind of political counterweight to the Paris-Berlin tandem within the European Union? To what extent could the Eastern European bloc influence EU policy? Do you think there is a risk that the European Union as we know it could split in two? Leave us your impressions in the comments and let's open up a debate. And of course, if you found this video interesting, don't forget to like and subscribe to VisualPolitik. Thank you so very much for being here. All the best. I will see you in the next one.